Hi, Deirdre Verbo here. Let's talk seniors, memory care issues, Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have a very special guest on today talking about a topic that people like to shy away from, but that nobody should, pre-planning your funeral. So a lot of you know me as from Just Like Homes, Dogwood Home, where we have our seniors with memory care issues in Shelton in a beautiful group home type setting. I'm also the author of the book Home to Home, which is a guide, a step-by-step housing guide for seniors. And we wrote a workbook that goes along with it that includes funeral planning in it. So it tells you like how to plan for everything and what your wishes are for your to leave to your children or your loved ones. So if you would like a workbook, just write to me. I'll send you one for free. You can always buy it on Amazon, but why when I'll send you one for free? So the workbook's great because it plans everything like where's the money, what are your wishes, where do you want to get buried or cremated, what would you like to happen when you pass away, where's your will, what are your important documents. Today we have a gentleman on, Patrick Ferry, from John J. Ferry and Sons Funeral Home that a lot of you, I'm sure, know about in Meriden because it's been around more than 130 years. And he also has a booklet you can get that's more comprehensive about funerals and planning and what your wishes are. I mean, let's face it, we're all going to be facing this one day, whether we want to or not. Hopefully you'll be 110, but one day it will happen, and don't you want your wishes heard? So I will tell you a little bit about Mr. Ferry, who'll be coming on. He likes to be called Pat. The John J. Ferry and Sons Funeral Home in Meriden has been meeting the needs of the community since 1890. That's amazing. After more than a century of service, it's the oldest funeral home in the city under the same family ownership and management. There's a lot of juniors and a lot of Ferries here. So John J. Ferry's business grew when he first opened it at the turn of the last century. He involved his sons, Thomas and William, and they formed John J. Ferry and Sons in 1913. After that, Thomas L. Ferry Jr. and his brother Vincent joined their father in the business. Vincent left to work elsewhere 10 years later, and his brother John J. Ferry, who had been a Navy bomber pilot in World War II, also joined the company and remained associated until his death in 1973. Thomas Ferry III is the present head of the family corporation, and he succeeded his late father, Thomas Ferry Jr. After the Depression, Thomas Ferry Sr. bought the home of Dr. Harold Meeks at 88 East Main Street in Meriden, the building they now reside in. And since then, they've put a few additions onto the property. So for the last 85 years, the Ferry Funeral Home has been located on this site. And it has a funeral home chapel and a little front wooden porch. And it's a beautiful building. It's been in Meriden forever. Besides Thomas Ferry III, the president of the firm, other members and professional staff include his two sons, Patrick and Daniel. Patrick, who's joining us today, as well as embalmers and funeral directors Craig Boyce, Kamira Serpa, and Allison McCormick. So quite a business, quite a history, quite amazing. Without further ado, let's say hello to Patrick Ferry of John J. Ferry and Sons Funeral. So hi, Patrick, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me today.
So Patrick, 131 years, 2 years now in the business. That's amazing.
Yeah. Me and my brother are fifth generation.
Oh my gosh. So before I ask you anything about funerals and pre-planning and planning, which is a very exciting topic because people might not want to hear about it, but we all need to know. It's like taxes, right?
Correct.
Things you need to know about. How is it working with family upon family upon family? Is there a lot of pressure?
Pressure, no. It's definitely interesting when you have the different generations. So my father did things one way. Me and my brother want to do things a certain different way. So, that transition took some time, but we made it work, and we have a good working relationship. But it's always tough, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure, the new generation comes in with like technology and new things, and the older generation's like, this has been working perfectly. You're like,
Exactly.
let's do
That's
this,
exactly.
bring in some new energy. It's all good. But it's so cool that it's been in your family forever. So I guess this is a big topic around the dinner table all the time.
Yeah, yeah. It's always kind of like, how did work go today?
Yeah,
So it's,
exactly.
yeah.
So tell us, there's a number of questions that you said people always ask or often ask you the same questions and want to know about funeral planning. Why should they pre-plan and things of that nature? Why is it important to pre-plan?
What I've seen over the years, the most important thing is I look at the families that have pre-planned versus the ones that haven't. And there's always this kind of unknown or this anxiety. Not They don't know what to expect. They don't know what their family's wishes were. They don't know about the costs. They don't know about the options. So on top of, losing someone that's important to you, that you love and care about, that's tough on its own. But then there's a lot of questions and decisions that have to be made for everyone's funeral, and not necessarily right away, but the big thing is, do we want to be cremated or not? That's a big decision, right? Does our family have cemetery plots, and where are they, and how do we get access to them? So there's a lot of things that it's really important to if you have that conversation with your family, like, hey, what are you thinking, dad or mom? Or what do you, if you have children like I do, what's going to happen if I ever was to pass away? Yeah, I'm a funeral director, and I have some notes, and me and my wife have joked about it, but it's that's the big important thing, to have that conversation with your family about, at some point, what would your wishes be, and then to get into the details of what does that mean. Do I want to have a church service? Well, which church? What do I want? Songs do I want at that mass? Or do I want to do certain readings, or do I want to have a wake or an open casket? So there's a lot of decisions, and I highly recommend that anyone on this on this call has a conversation with their local funeral director at some point, has a conversation with their family to
So
alleviate some of that anxiety.
when is the time? When is the right time? Because I feel like when somebody is getting close to, the end, um, it's awkward. So
Yeah,
when is the right time? Like it's hard to bring it up to a 95-year-old. Hey, let's talk about your funeral. But
yeah,
and then a 60-year-old might be like, who wants to talk about my funeral? So is there
exactly.
like an appropriate time? And if people are not wanting to talk about it, is there a certain way that you would suggest bringing it up? Like my father-in-law totally avoids the subject. He's in his 80s. Doesn't want to
Yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, it's hard. What happens a lot of times is someone that does pass away in your family, and that's a good time to say, "Hey, Uncle Jim passed away. What did you think about his funeral? We need to, have that conversation about your funeral." Or if someone famous passes away, you kind of bring it up, like you don't really want to confront them, but you also want to say, it's going to happen someday. We should have that conversation. And sometimes we've had families come in, like the children would come in and say, my dad will talk about this, but what are our options? I know he's mentioned cremation, but I don't really know what that means. So sometimes it's good to have that conversation with your local funeral director, just to see what the options are before you even jump into that conversation with a loved one, just so you have a little bit of information or background before, having that important conversation. Because sometimes you get that opportunity to talk about it, and if you don't have some of those answers, sometimes it's hard to bring it up again.
Hard to bring it up again. And also, oh, what was I going to ask you? What is the what are the options like the cremation and burial? What is the difference in cost and timing and embalming?
Yeah.
What's the
Yeah. So the biggest thing, I guess, yeah, yeah. I guess cost is a big thing, right? If you're going to be cremated versus, going to a cemetery and having like what you would consider a traditional burial, you are definitely talking about more money, because you do need a casket, you do need a vault. The vault is what the casket would have to go in at the cemetery. Then you would have to buy a cemetery plot. So you're talking about significantly more money to have that traditional funeral that we always say, versus a cremation. But what we're seeing a lot of times today is kind of a hybrid situation where you have like a wake, you have a viewing, and then somebody's cremated. That person might be cremated after, and then the burial could be done at a later date when the family's ready. Especially with what's been going on with COVID, the whole traditional funeral.
The burial, when you're saying the burial, you mean the burial of the cremated?
If they're going to have a if they're going to have a burial at a cemetery, it gives you a little bit of flexibility to do it at a later date, because not everyone has cemetery plots. So sometimes you kind of want to have services around the date that somebody passed, but you might not know at the end, what am I going to do? Am I going to get, we're going to go to a cemetery? Are we going to go to some type of scattering garden somewhere? Yeah. And so sometimes, folks definitely, they either want to be cremated or they don't. And sometimes it's nice to have that conversation, but yes, you also asked about pros and cons. Well, if someone wants to be cremated and you don't want to make the rest of those decisions about having a visitation or calling hours or having a mass or having some type of service or going to the cemetery, you don't have to make those decisions right away. You can take a little bit of time after the cremation takes place and decide what you want to do. And that's common these days too. But it ultimately, though, sometimes it comes down to finances. Like I mentioned, sometimes it comes down to personal decision, a personal choice. But that's kind of why it's important to have that conversation in advance, and then you can kind of talk through the different options with your local funeral director.
So if you are having a traditional burial, is there a time frame that you have to be buried within?
Not necessarily. Usually it's within 7 to 10 days or a couple weeks. The only consideration there, we always mention to our families, that if you do want to have an open casket, the longer that time goes on, you would need to be embalmed for an open casket. That's usually a Department of Public Health. It's usually a funeral home policy that there would be embalming. But usually we'd say, within 2 weeks, if you'd want to see your loved one, because after that, sometimes, nature does take its course, even though we did all the procedures we possibly could. But, with bad weather, with COVID, we've had to, hold services for a significant amount of time. So, typically within 10 days is what most folks do, but, there might be family on vacation, family out of country, out of state, under quarantine. So there have been situations where you can wait, but a lot of folks want to have it within a reasonable amount of time so they can have that closure, have the service, and not have it linger on. But, there's not necessarily a time frame.
Does somebody have to be embalmed if they're getting cremated?
No. Typically,
what if you have a wake and they're, a viewing?
Typically, you would have to be embalmed if there's going to be an open casket with a public viewing. And that's usually the funeral home's policy, and it's usually the Department of Public Health's policy. It's not state law, but it is, usually most funeral home policies. It's to protect everyone that comes and visits, your family and the deceased.
How is it protection?
So part of the embalming process is there's basically 3 parts. There's the preservation, there's the cleansing of the body, and then there's like the presentation of. So you protect the visitors and the family from anything that might, it's just depending on what somebody passed away from. The embalming process typically helps, with the way that the folks are going to look and just protecting, everyone that visits.
You mean like if they had a virus, you could get the virus from them?
Potentially, anything is possible, but there's a disinfection part of the process of embalming. So it just, protects everyone just in case. After the fact. Yeah. So it's typically required for any open casket viewing. So,
now there's 2 parts to the funeral, right? Is it the part that you're doing, which is doing everything with the church and the body and the wake and the service and the mass and all that? And then it's a totally separate thing if you are going to a burial site, a cemetery. Is you work separately with the cemetery, or do you work with cemetery?
Yeah, we typically do everything for our family. So if there's a church involved, we would coordinate with the church. If there's a cemetery involved, we coordinate with them.
Okay.
We didn't mention the military yet, but if someone's a veteran, they're entitled to a certain number of benefits, military honors, or even burial in a military cemetery. So we try to coordinate all of those things, for our families, that's the service that we provide.
Well, I love that military service where they fold the flag and they play the taps, and that's
Yeah.
so beautiful. Are there other services besides military service that do traditional things like that?
Um, in regards to, guys, can you ask that question again? I'm not sure what.
Like, is there anything? I love to go to military
Hmm.
funerals because, well, I love the part in military funerals of folding of the flag and the symbolism and the taps that are played.
Hmm.
Are there other types of things besides military that do things like that at funerals?
There are, some civic organizations do have rituals and services that they'll do. So I'm a part of the Elks. I'm a member of the Elks Club in Meriden. So any of their members that pass, they'll come and do services. The Lions Club. We even have a local veterans association here in town, the Veterans of Meriden, and they do a military honor service as well.
And
It's very similar.
the police do something too, right?
Yeah, the police, firefighters, any of those organizations. It's always kind of special when they're involved.
Nice. So, what is about the cost of, and I know the funeral plot and the headstone is a separate cost
Hmm.
that's taken care of by the grave site, right? So,
Yeah.
what is an idea, just a range of costs? And I know people can do lots of extravagant things, but what is a range of cost for a typical funeral if you have a wake and a little service and you're cremated, or a wake and a little service and you're going to be buried?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a common question we get over the phone. Usually what we tell folks, if you're going to be cremated and have any type of services, you're probably somewhere in like the $4,000 to $6,000 range. If you're going to have a viewing and an open casket and a mass, and you're going to go to a cemetery, you're definitely more like the $8,000 to $12,000 range. But it really depends on the cemetery your family has, because those charges can be all over the place. If you're the church you decide to go to, a lot of times the funeral home costs are relatively the same. But depending on where you go, is it out of state or if it's in state, private cemetery versus a religious associated cemetery, those can fluctuate. But that's usually like kind of our starting point. Then that's why I say, come on in and meet with us. Let's talk about specifics and see where give you a more accurate estimate. But that's typically kind of where you're looking.
But I guess because you arrange all the flowers and the music, and so it can get extravagant.
It can. It can. It can. And then sometimes it can be very simple, which is, just as nice. It just depends on, your family's wishes or the deceased's wishes.
I think it's such a great idea to pre-plan it, like you say, because my father passed away 6 years ago. I went with my mother, and I was really happy. This was in New York, and I was very happy to see that I thought we were going to have to make all the arrangements, not for
Mhm.
the wake, but I thought I was going to be printing church brochures and like figuring out how to do all this. But they did everything from printing the church brochures to finding a bagpiper. My dad was Irish. To
Oh, that's great.
finding the musicians, to finding, they did everything, to even getting if we wanted a limo or whatever going to and from the church. So I was pretty impressed by that they took care of everything. It was like one-stop shopping. The flowers, and I'm sure you do the same thing. I had just never been part of a funeral plan before. So I'm sure you do the same thing. But I was imagining, oh my gosh, how are we going to divide and conquer? Who's going to order flowers? Who's going to call limo? Who's going to do the brochure? And they
Mhm.
did everything.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, there's a lot of decisions to be made, right? So it's one of those things, the earlier you can have that conversation and start planning, the better.
And and you really shouldn't be doing it when you're in a terrible state, which is shock of somebody dying, even if they were sick. It's a shock. I was with my mom, for instance, and she was saying yes to everything. So they're like, you want a limo to go from your house to the church, which was 1 mile away, and by
Yeah.
himself, and he was being cremated.
Hmm.
Like, that's $450. She's like, sure. I'm like, we could pick you up, Mom. It's a mile away.
Yeah.
You're not,
Yeah.
there's no funeral procession going on here. She's like, oh, okay. Like, she just said yes to everything because she was in a state of shock. So it's a good idea to plan to know your real wishes and to figure it out beforehand. And then
Yeah.
you have an extra bonus, like you were telling me. Tell everybody about the Medicaid spend down and why it's such a great idea if you're going on to Medicaid, what you can do.
Yeah, so the state of Connecticut allows you to put away up to $10,000 in what's called an irrevocable trust. And I just tell folks it's basically it's a savings account for your funeral. So that it's a really great function that the state allows. So when you know that you're heading towards that Title 19 situation, the state of Connecticut allows you to put away those funds towards your funeral. It's relatively easy process on our end. You'd come in, you'd meet with the funeral director, we would write down your wishes. So they would want us to have a trust document that shows how much you're putting away, a contract that, you know, kind of matches that amount. And then that usually is an easy thing for Title 19. But it's a great function to, you know, if you know about it and you know you're heading in that direction, to talk to a funeral director, talk to a social worker that might be helping you, and get those funds put away before you're on Title 19, so you can have the funeral that you deserve. You've worked hard your whole life. You should have the funeral that you want. And it's good. It's a good thing to know. Like we talked about before, you really want to have that conversation with your family and your funeral director. And when you're heading towards the Title 19 situation, get those funds put away before you run out of money.
So Patrick, if somebody is going from, Medicare to Medicaid onto Title 19 and they've used up their money, before they use it up, they could put away $10,000 in this trust for funeral planning. So they come to you, they come up with a funeral. Let's say the funeral costs $10,000. What if they don't pass away for 10 or 12 years? Are you going to honor a $10,000 funeral?
What happens a lot of times is actually those funds earn interest. And also to kind of clarify too, if by chance your funeral is say 12 or 14,000, there's another trust that you could open up that would be, it's called a revocable trust, and it's more geared towards burial plots. So your cemetery costs, because if you don't have a cemetery plot, you don't have a stone, you're definitely going to be over the $10,000 limit. So the state does allow you to put those funds away. 10,000 is kind of what we use for most of the time. But just for a little clarification, there's actually two trusts if you had to go, if you're going to spend more than 10.
So Patrick, is that something somebody has to do with an attorney, or is that something you do there at the funeral home?
We can open the trust. Almost any funeral home can open a trust right for you. You definitely want to work with your attorney and your family, but that's something we can handle doing for you. Any funeral director can do it.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. And another nice bonus is, a lot of folks have their whole lives here in Connecticut. They retire. They say, you know what, we're going to Florida. So those trusts are transferable to funeral homes. They're really it's a savings account in your name, and they're transferable to any funeral home anywhere. So, we can put it up for anyone, but ultimately, any funeral home you decide to use, if it's in Connecticut or Florida, wherever it might be, those are your funds to use for your funeral and your funeral only.
That's amazing, because then it's paid for and your family doesn't have to worry about not just your wishes, but actually the payment. All the arrangements are made, everything is a done deal. Yeah. I think the worst part is trying to figure this out while you're in shock, especially, if somebody elderly is passing away that's sick and you're expecting it and they're 98 years old, that's one thing. But you have a 50-year-old spouse that passes away, you're like in, total shock.
Complete shock.
So it's really great to have it all set up.
Yeah.
What else? What other kind of questions do you usually get? Have you had any really weird wishes that people want at their funeral?
I guess the funniest one, and we had somebody that really wanted to be buried upside down. I can't really say why, but we went through their services.
You mean
like, yeah, literally in their casket upside down. That was their wishes.
But not in the ground.
In the ground. Yeah. No, so you wouldn't know, but in the casket they asked after their wake was done to be flipped upside down.
And that was a wish that they came to you beforehand and said.
Oh yeah, have it in writing. What's that?
Did they tell you why, and you just can't say?
I can't really say.
Okay.
You can use your imagination and maybe think.
That's very interesting.
It is definitely interesting. It's one that stuck in my mind for a very long time.
My children at my dad's wake, my father was an Irish storyteller, a joker, and he sent everybody one-line jokes. He was like loved his one-line jokes. He sent them out one by one via email to everybody for years. So when he passed, my kids made up a booklet of his jokes and gave them out at the wake, and people loved it because it was his personality, and it was great. So
that's nice.
Yeah, it's fun to do the personal touches and things like that.
It makes a big difference. And those are the things, if you do pre-plan, you can think about, because it's part of the pre-planning process is just like brainstorming a little bit. Like, well, how could we make the wake special? We don't want the wake to be the same as everyone's. You come in, you say, I'm sorry, and then you leave. Well, you want to have some pictures or some memorabilia, or take a joke from my father's book or something. You definitely want to make it special, because, we're all unique, and we should have unique experiences for our funerals as well.
And do you often have families that haven't planned come in like kind of in disagreement about what they want for their parent?
Yeah. I mean, that's always tough when you have different, opinions, but they've never talked to their family about it. And now, we have to make a decision in a relatively short amount of time, and, no one's had that conversation yet. So, just another benefit of, talk to your family, talk to your loved ones, talk to your funeral director about it.
That's amazing. And the length of time that you have been around at John J. Ferry, 130 years, is there any other business in Meriden that's been around that long?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm sure we have some really old businesses in town. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but I'm sure there's some very old businesses in town.
Family run still like this, 5 generations?
I don't know if it's family run anymore. That'd be a good question, but there are some old businesses. I couldn't necessarily say if there's family owned older than us in town right now.
That's really cool. So Patrick, in summary, you would have people plan, talk to their loved one as best they can, get some of their wishes down.
Definitely.
Young or old, I think it's easier to ask younger people just so you have an idea.
Yeah.
What they want. My aunt, for instance, she's not younger, but she wants a song per family member. She's picked out a tune per family member that's supposed to represent them that she wants played at her funeral. I can say, this is for my daughter, this is for my son.
Yeah, those are the special touches you can have put in place if you do pre-plan.
Yeah, I already wrote them all down. So it's nice, because if you're not afraid to talk about it, you could have like a fun funeral or a nice funeral that you wanted,
Yeah. Well, like a lot of folks are using the celebration of life term now instead of just a funeral and we're mourning. We're celebrating someone's life, so you try to have that more positive spin. Like, that's kind of what we're trying to go and have, be more positive, a more positive experience for everyone.
And Patrick, has COVID done what has COVID done for the funerals and the wakes and everything?
Yeah, it's changed the way we had to think about things, like, this type of program where it's almost like a Zoom. We didn't really use Zoom. We didn't really have, funerals over video for folks out of state or people that were quarantined or, unable to attend. It's really, brought technology in. It's made us all be more creative about how do we have a service.
Do you do that? Do you like set up the whole Zoom thing for people that aren't there?
Yeah, we either use Zoom. We actually used Facebook Live the other day because that was one that was better for the family. More of them knew how to use that versus the Zoom.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of funeral homes are doing that. Using technology. Unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, delaying services. A lot of folks didn't have the wakes, didn't have the receptions afterwards, and you could see it was hard on everybody not being able to do what you're so used to doing, having friends and family around to support you when COVID first started. A lot of folks were scared to have any of those services, and you could see it was hard on everyone to not have that support.
And my mother-in-law passed away during COVID, not of COVID, just of dementia.
I'm sorry.
5 people at her funeral. She was 93, but 5 people at her funeral. So you have no closure. Even the 5 people that are there couldn't hug each other.
Yeah.
So it was, tough. You couldn't have a celebration. You didn't, as the family members, you didn't feel like people got to say their goodbyes or anything. It was just, it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, made us all think about how much we appreciated what we were able to do before, and having support and having family and friends around. That was, probably the hardest thing for everyone, not having like that reception afterwards. We can kind of kick back and talk about mom or talk about dad and,
Yeah.
their lives and how they impacted us. Tell those stories. What helps us get through this.
So before you go, who is the oldest person that you buried?
Ooh, we've had a couple folks over 100. I'm trying to think. I think we had someone that was almost 105, probably 103, 104.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so amazing.
Wow. My
Yeah,
God, that's amazing.
yeah, very inspirational. Like, man, I hope I get, to get that close.
Yeah,
So
people are living so long these days.
they
So,
are, they
oh
are.
my gosh. Well, do you think that your son will take over the business after you? Will join you?
Possibly. I don't know. His sister's a firecracker too, so hopefully one of them decide they
We
like
can
it too.
make it and children instead of and sons, so
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
with the times.
No, it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Anybody that wants to get in contact with you, you are right there in Meriden.
Yep.
John J. Ferry Sons Funeral Home. I'm sure everybody knows about you. But, if they want to get in contact with you, do some pre-planning, ask questions. You're so open and you just know so much about the business. And, well, you grew up in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's amazing. I'm just like impressed by how long. I want to get my kids involved in my business. Nobody wants to do it. I don't know how 5 generations of parents 5 generations of kids got involved.
Yeah, it definitely gets harder every generation. That's for sure.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I love it. So thank you for all the information and Title 19 information, how you could save money and pre-plan and why it's so important. And you should also know what the costs are. You might not, like, first and only time I ever went was with my dad, with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea what it cost to bury somebody. So it's
Yeah.
good to know in your mind because you need to be prepared for
Yeah.
that expense or have some way of paying for it, and not be shocked
Yeah.
when it happens.
Yeah. We've never had someone come in and pre-plan and be like, boy, this was a waste of time. Everyone's been blown away. Like, this has been such a helpful conversation. And, just to even come in and just brainstorm what you might be able to do. Don't even have to, talk about money. Just what could we do? What are your wishes and how can we plan for you? It's, if nothing else from this, conversation today, if you just have a conversation with your family, conversation with your funeral director, get out there and just, acknowledge that it's something that's going to happen and always want to be always want to plan and be prepared.
And you have a book that people can come in and get from you, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. It's called Putting My House in Order. We can mail it to you if you wanted to give us a call. We're going to see if we can get an emailed copy out to everyone. Similar to the book that you mentioned, but it's just really good information and it's everything that you would need in one handbook there. Nobody would have any questions about what your wishes were if you fill this out.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate it. And we wish you the best. Stay safe. And thank you for doing what you're doing all these years and continued success another 132 years.
Oh, thank you. You as well. Take care.
Thanks again. Bye-bye. Well, that was Patrick Ferry of John J. Ferry and Sons, 130 years in business. I have a cousin who's a farmer in Ireland, and he can't even get one of his 5 kids to take over the farm. So it's impressive that 5 generations have continued such a fantastic business. If you didn't get the point, you should be pre-planning. I am going to go and talk to my mom now about her wishes now this weekend after this phone conversation. And it's nice to know just what music people want, what songs they want, what my father wanted, a bagpiper. So, what your wishes are at your funeral, who's going to pay, how's it going to be paid for, and just what you would like. It's nice to have that final say-so in your life. So get a hold of Pat. He is very helpful. And well, until next time, enjoy, stay safe, the best. Hi, Deirdre here again. Thank you for joining me on Let's Talk Seniors Memory Care Issues. Is this an issue hitting home? Do you have a parent or loved one with memory care issues who feels not safe at home anymore? Are isolation, falls, and safety issues becoming a big concern? Welcome to Dogwood Senior Home, premier boutique residential senior living specializing in memory care. It's country living at its best in the Huntington section of Shelton, Connecticut. Senior residential homes are concepts sweeping the nation with 47,000 across the U.S. We're pleased to open Dogwood Senior Home as it will be only number 6 for Connecticut. Brand new, sparkling clean, and safe. We are COVID-free. Residential care homes boast a very low COVID infection rate across the nation. This is due to the intimacy of size and speed in which the caretakers can shift to accommodate immediate needs. They are much safer than the large homes and facilities, as you can imagine. It has been documented that residents have less falls and a better quality of life in a residential home environment. Our home is more affordable than the big box facility. You pay one all-inclusive price, and that price is guaranteed for the life of the resident. With an incredible 1-to-3 caregiver ratio, which you won't find anywhere else. Our friendly, loving caregivers are dedicated and trained in Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson issues. Call me at 203-689-7562 for a talk and tour. I would love to meet you and your loved one. See you soon. Bye.